and welcome to My Net Childminder, a podcast that's meant for us childminders. I'm Charlotte and I'll be your host and colleague through these episodes. And today we're talking all about community. What is a community? Why are they important? How do children fit into communities? How do our childminding settings fit into communities? And lots of ideas for you to use within your own setting. So go and grab that cuppa or your headphones so you can do the washing up and let's get chatting. Community is one of those words that we assume everyone knows the meaning and has the same definition of. But I don't think that's quite the route I wanted to go down today. So, of course, knowing me, I did a bit of research, and any links to research that I found, I will obviously put in the show notes like I normally do. And I found this definition from AMJ Public Health, they wrote this in 2001, and it goes like this. A group of people with diverse characteristics who are linked by social ties, share common perspectives, and engage in joint action in geographical locations or settings. Okay. Sounds like it makes sense, sounds similar to things that I would think community means, but in the spirit of making sure everything is well-rounded, I went and found another definition, this time from Cabigo, Martin and Mackay, and they found this in 2016, where they produced a literature review. Now, if you don't know what a literature review is, that's fine. It basically is where a group of researchers or a researcher gather all sorts of already written research and they on a particular theme, and they pull it and they kind of look at it all together. They compare it, they see if there's any similarities with the literature, and it also is used to find gaps in research. So if something hasn't been researched, then that's when they know they need to kind of put their money and proposals into. So that's what a literature review is, and this literature review was all about community, and they seem to suggest that community is a highly used term that can mean a variety of different things. So they developed a system of making themes about community, and they highlighted 12 different themes, and their definition is put in place to support researchers in their work in measuring community, and they also wanted to provide support for policy making. So having a clear definition of what community is that everybody can kind of follow will help policy making, because it will all have a similar aim. And their definition was a community is a group of people that interact and support each other. They are bounded by shared experiences or characteristics, a sense of belonging, and often by their physical proximity. So what I pulled out from there is that community has to involve people, it has to involve location of some description, whether that is it kind of geographically very close by or whether that's online. It has to involve some kind of action, and it has to, well, not has to, but it usually aims to have positive outcomes for the people in the community. So these themes that I pulled out from those two definitions are the kind of definition and ideas that I'm going to be using today as we follow the rest of the podcast episode talking about community. Now we have a definition of community that we're going to use for today. I think that I would like to put it into some examples, thinking about people, location, action, and a positive outcome. So I'm going to think about my setting, and hopefully you'll think about your settings, and they might be similar, they might be really different, and that's totally fine. So when I think about community relating to my childminding business, I feel that it's part of multiple communities. My first community is always going to be my setting. It involves myself, the children I look after, both present and past. It involves the families of those children and also my family. The action here is being a supporting and loving environment for the children, both their development and learning, and for who they are. So that would then bring positive outcomes for them, for their future, for their present, for their mental health, for all sorts of things. So that kind of fits our definition of community that we talked about earlier. My second community, though, is the world outside my front door. The people here would be myself and the children, not so much their families, but they might be involved if they live quite locally. But it does involve the people who live in kind of your immediate environment. So if you live in a village or a suburb, these kind of your neighbours, the staff at the local school and those children, the people at playgroups that we attend, the people that we see often, like the post person. And I've chosen to wrap those all together into one community because it's kind of the community in the location of my village. But it could be argued that we could break each of these down into a micro community, because the school, like mine, is going to be its own community, and the playgroup we go to is probably going to be its own community in its own right. But for me, that's my second community. It's where I'm going to go out and do things. That involves people, that involves a location, and that involves, for me, the action is to provide kind of a nice environment to live. It's somewhere for us all to be connected. It's somewhere for it to be tolerable, that you aren't isolated. We're working together to create a kind of community feel in our local area. That might be providing events like carnivals or summer fairs. It could be things like a bake sale, kind of like Macmillan bake sale. Those kinds of things, to me, are the action of this second community. My third community is my fellow childminders. You are my third community. That you are people who have the same kind of skills or experiences, and this is where the location changes. So it could be that they're childminders that I meet in real life. It could be, going to the local toddler group or a childminder group and you meet other childminders. Maybe you go to forums or conferences. It includes you because virtual spaces are also locations. We are all linked by our role, and although we're not geographically close, our community can be seen in full force very often when something goes a bit wrong. For example, if media coverage happens that puts childminders in a bad light, you will see on social media childminders descending and throwing their full weight of their community at this problem. So even though we're not all next door neighbours, you can feel that community when something happens, that childminders will flock to the area and give their views and say that this is not okay. So the action for me in the childminding community is to share experiences and to give the best outcomes to the young children that we look after and kind of improve our service. And without the community, it would feel isolating, uninspiring, and quite often we feel misunderstood, because when we talk to people outside the community, they quite often will say, oh, you're a babysitter, you put them in front of the TV, these kind of things. So we do feel quite misunderstood. And I feel that we need the childminding community in order to stay sane and kind of perform our best. So there is your positive outcome and action. So all of these communities, I've tried to wrap around the definition that we talked about a little while ago, and hopefully you can reflect on what your communities are, and maybe you've even got more than these. So have a little think, and then we're going to talk about why is this so important. Before we dig into the research about why communities are important, I thought we should just reflect on what it would feel like if we didn't have them. Maybe it would feel isolating and lonely. Maybe things would feel a bit listless. Maybe you think it would be a positive thing. I can't choose for you what you think it would feel like. Generally, community, when we think about it, is a positive thing, but there are some communities that are not so positive and do have a negative effect on people. An obvious example of this is a cult. That involves people in a location and it involves a common aim or action, but those actions may not be positive. So therefore, we need to think about how we're going to balance the positives and negatives of being in a community. I think this happens because being in a community is part of human nature. We crave it, and even the most kind of reserved people still crave some kind of human connection. And so it's very difficult to take community away from people. And if things that make people vulnerable, that do then make community a harder thing to gain, for example, an unhappy home life or kind of previous abuse or current abuse even. You might find that people with a low self-esteem might go into communities that have a more negative effect. And then obviously there are things, current abuse like grooming, they will draw people into negative communities. But also if you have kind of physical barriers to access in a community, you would kind of not have the positive effects of community because you can't reach it. So I personally include young children in this category of being vulnerable to not being able to access a positive community, and I will talk a bit more about this later. But first, let's go into some of the research. So Nicole Wilson and Rodriguez et al., and et al. Means and more people and more, in 2024 looked at the well-being impacts of being a volunteer. So this is this year's research. This is fresh, hot off the press. And their work was focused in America, but they seem to strongly advocate for things like volunteering to be a social prescription by medical professionals because of the positive outcomes of volunteering. I argue that this is because volunteering is giving you a role in action in a community. So if you aren't part of a community really, or you're not very engaged in your community, and you are socially prescribed something for anxiety or for depression or other similar kinds of mental health issues, then you being given a role in a community is instantly stopping you from being isolated. It's instantly giving you a sense of purpose. It's instantly giving you those human connections that we all crave, even if you don't really feel like it. It's kind of a deeper level thing, in my opinion. And this kind of research looked at qualities such as motivation and quality of life, and it also suggested that it could improve your health so much that it could extend your life. And this is a strong case for how important community can be to our health and self-esteem. So when we're looking at positive communities, how great that you could extend your life because you're experiencing positive things. And for me, this relates a bit to going back 4 years into how people struggled and survived through COVID-19 kind of mentally. The lockdowns were kind of community taking away. They were, the lockdown stopped us accessing communities, and it was overnight. Overnight, we lost our communities to boundaries that we couldn't get through. We didn't know either how long it would last. We didn't know if it was going to be a week or months, or if this was kind of the new normal. And although key workers still got to go into work, we added additional barriers like social distancing and masks and all of these things. And certain people within those work communities couldn't go to work, and some people could. So everything got really shuffled around. Our hobbies got shut down, and for me that was partner dancing, and the impact of that is still so strong that I haven't returned to partner dancing in the same way. I am back to dancing, but it changed how my perception of kind of communities, and it's been really difficult to get back into on a personal level. So not only is the impact instant when you take away a community, but it also then kind of steers how people go forward. Children lost their school communities overnight, but that human kind of craving for it meant that we clawed for it. We all grappled with technology. Nobody had heard of Zoom really before, or Teams, other than people that worked in kind of these office environments. But we all learned how to use them, and we tried to keep our weekly activities going with those people through these voice calls and these video calls. And schools where, like I personally was doing storytelling sessions over Skype with the children that I looked after so that they could continue, seeing their friends and me. And so we definitely tried to keep our communities in place. And it was part of, really, and I've talked about this before, in the cave person days, where our brains were wired to have communities to survive. We needed to be able to trust people that they weren't going to do something bad to us, in our sleep, and that we were going to share resources and communicate to each other if there was a problem. So we needed those communities in order to survive. And really, our brains have not changed that much. We are still cave people. We're a bit more advanced with language and emotions and things, but ultimately our brains are cave people brains. And that's why I think community is such an important thing. It helps to keep us well, it helps to keep us sane, and it helps to protect us. So that is why I feel like it's so important and why we crave it. Earlier, I plopped young children into the category of people who are vulnerable to not being able to access communities. But I'm sure that you're asking in the back of your mind somewhere, why, Charlotte, why did you put young children into this category? And what I did was I thought about the barriers that children have to accessing a community, and hopefully you'll be able to see why I am arguing this case as I read it out to you. So, to me, children have a lack of agency, even though we try really hard in our settings to give them freedom, to give them choices. There's lots of approaches that we've talked about in previous episodes that give children more time and more space. But really, children don't have very much agency over their life. They have kind of a lack of skills compared to adults because they've only been alive for a very short amount of time. I quite often have this conversation at the table when we're kind of cutting our food, that the children ask why I'm so good at it, and I will say, I've had 30 more years of doing it than you have. So it's when you're my age, you'll be able to do it just as well. So, but as adults, we see children as having less skills. We also, in our culture, have a very romantic perspective over children, that they're innocent, that they're not very capable, that they're little babies forever. And this can often be a barrier to children because we kind of stop them as to what we think. These tiny little babies that are soft and cute and chubby and they're like this for a long time and they're not very capable. It stops us giving them the option that they can do more than what we think they can. And especially when you compare our children to children in other cultures, which you actually do see quite a lot of on kind of reels on TikTok and Instagram and things, if it feeds you that like, look at this daycare in China and these children are and look at this daycare in Sweden and children are using massive tools and things, which is not very common in our culture, even though it's coming through. So our kind of cultural perspective of children is a barrier to children because we don't think they're as capable as maybe they are. Communication skills, very young babies, they don't have words. They may flip out over something because they don't have the kind of restraint there, and that can, when you're out at a restaurant within your community and a child at the table is going absolutely nuts over something because they don't have the skills to be able to contain that and they need their safe person, etc. The onlookers can be quite intimidating and not very welcoming to that child. Though we kind of have this adult child kind of clash going on, that we need adult only spaces, or children should be kind of that seen and not heard kind of thing is still in there. So to me, that's a barrier to children in community. There's also an argument to say how many hours children are now spending in childcare is a barrier to their community. If children are in settings, and I've had children in my setting for 11 hours a day, they are going, in the winter, they are starting my house in the dark and they are ending my house in the dark, and then they go home, go to bed, and then they come back again. And it's not until the weekend that they're getting to be out and about with their family and their community. So there is an argument to say that the amount of hours that children are in childcare for is limiting kind of these community experiences. They're not popping to the shop with a parent or a grandparent as often as they maybe did back in the 80s, 90s. I also feel like we have, I know it's a very controversial subject, but just plainly, we do have a lot of children of immigrants in the country, and I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong at all. But what I am saying is that these children may not have access to extended family, and they also might have things such as language barriers, A, for themselves, but B, for their parents. So actually, quite often young children's language, developing language in the country that they're living in, very quickly can overrun what their parents' are level is at. So the parents might not feel like they can access communities, which then stops the children, even though the children can speak the language fully and might even end up translating as they get older for their parents. So this is a kind of a twofold barrier. That is a language barrier for them, and it's a language barrier for their parents, which also then impacts what they're accessing. So there are lots of barriers for children, aren't there? Child-free spaces, that's becoming more and more common. Safeguarding can be a barrier, and I will kind of talk about that in more detail. And yeah, parenting skills and parents' mental health can also have an impact on children, because children are not as able to go off on their own into the world and without a parent. And if the parent doesn't feel capable of accessing their community, or they are isolated from a community, that immediately impacts the child. So ultimately, children have less autonomy over their lives. They have very little control over the places they go, the people they hang out with. Do they get left alone to discover things for themselves? Probably not. Do they, they don't get to go to a community hall and hang out with people who they would choose. If we go to a playgroup, we're choosing that for them. And quite often we, as they get older, we'll say, do you want to go to this? Do you want to go to that? But the children are not getting to choose which people are in this space. If I would go to partner dancing, for example, if I had to go to Lindy Hop, I'm choosing to go to a place where everybody enjoys the same thing as me. If children go to a toddler group, yes, all the children like playing, but they're not going to a group that's just about dinosaurs, right? Because they love dinosaurs and they're going to find all these friends that really love dinosaurs. They're not getting the choice to do that. So how do they get the chance to find their own community? We're kind of doing it for them as the adult. We're putting them into communities, and they're not getting the choice to choose their community. So that's a really interesting thing I find to be a barrier to children accessing communities. It's accessing the community that they want might not necessarily be happening. Now, safeguarding. Why have I said that safeguarding is a barrier to young children? We have a huge safeguarding culture in our country, and we know that this is really important. It's like our vital number one, most important thing is that we keep those children safe. And that is perfectly acceptable. But I do think it's important that our opinion of safeguarding can have its costs and impacts, as well as, the positive things. And it does have negative things as well. And I'm not saying that, the negatives outweigh the positives, because child safety is the most important thing. But I do think it's something as practitioners that we need to reflect on, because if we know that it does have costs and impacts, then we can try and mitigate those. I am in no way saying that we should stop safeguarding children. It's the number one priority. But what I am saying is that adults need to know the impacts that these policies have on teeny tiny humans. So social media is a fun one for this. And the other day, I read comments from nursery practitioners saying that many settings in their policies, many settings have policies that say things like they can't say that they love a child. And this is really, the comment section was like kaboom on these posts. And it's very interesting seeing how different nursery settings are to childminders, and for me the best place to find this is the comments of these posts, because the people commenting are the people who are living the experiences, and the expectation of nurseries is very different to childminding, and everybody is different, and everybody will have a different policy. Your policy is not going to be the same as mine, and you might also agree that you shouldn't say you love children because they're not yours. But this policy in particular was put in place as a safeguarding policy to protect the children and the staff. However, when a child, the argument that was happening was that a child was telling a staff member that they loved them, and another member of staff said, "Oh, I love you too," and then the staff member watching wasn't comfortable and didn't know what to do. And there were many people commenting saying, "Oh, my setting has policies that state that you can't say that," and professional love is a very interesting subject. But for me, it kind of went oof to me that our safeguarding is so high that children aren't allowed to know that they're loved. And it was very conflicting for me, because in some ways safeguarding children is showing them what good relationships are. What is a positive relationship, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And unfortunately that there is a bit of difficulty in knowing what is and what isn't, because everyone's opinion is a little bit different. But often with children, they don't, when you're a child, your family where you live, that is normal. Whether you're in a really positive environment with lots of money, lots of opportunities, lots of parents are constantly telling you that they love you and everything's very kind of equal, and that's normal for them, right? But then at the other end of the spectrum, being emotionally abused is normal for them, and being neglected is normal for them. That is normal life. And we need to find a balance as practitioners, it kind of in the middle, to say kind of what kind of things are normal and how to speak out if things are not kind of positive for you. So for me, if a child says they love you and you don't really answer them back, you're kind of, are you affecting their self-esteem? Are you affecting their sense of belonging and more things like this? And there's a very big question over how do we find the balance, because very young children, we look after children from 3 months old, like that's so tiny. And how do you not allow your setting to make the child feel loved, because you need to keep your staff safe, and you need to keep things very separate, and we're not their family, and etc. So it's a really interesting debate, and try not to get too lost down the rabbit hole if you do go to look at these comments. But I feel like this safeguarding culture has created a fear for people interacting with young children. So as an example, unfortunately, many men feel like they can't speak to young children because they feel like they're going to be accused of paedophilia. It's basically, a man cannot speak to a young child because they're going to be accused of being a paedophile. And that's a real fear for many people, that we need to protect children from people who might be dangerous and unsafe, but also a real fear for men that they feel like they can't talk to children because of what will happen to them. So they're safeguarding themselves also. And it may sound really extreme, but it's real. And it's a big part of why men don't work in childcare. And I'm not a man. I can't give adequate voice to this. But I went and researched, as I do. And Peterson in 2014 cited in Maloney 2022 in his article for Nursery World, reinforces this point about the barriers of men working in childcare, and how this safeguarding culture fear has impacted who can interact with children and how the children can interact with adults. So it definitely is something to think about with safeguarding, that we have created a fear for ourselves in order to protect young children, and we need to think about the costs and the outcomes of this and against the benefits. And it may seem like I'm off on a wild tangent, but I'm really not. In my opinion, people are scared of interacting and forming relationships with young children because we need to safeguard them. And how does that not stop children accessing community? How does that not limit them? it limits their experiences, it limits the stories they hear about other people's lives, and it limits their exposure to role models and interests and opportunities. And I think that's a real awful shame. Young children are predominantly placed in communities of their parents' needs and desires. They are not put, yes, we might go to a group that's all about children, but generally it's parent needs to go to work. You're put in this community of childcare because of this. And the parent will choose based on opinions of friends, Ofsted reports. They're not necessarily thinking about what their child's super keen interest is, because at 3 months old, 6 months old, they're maybe too young to have a super keen interest. So therefore, a young child's communities, in the most part, is their family and the childcare. And they probably don't have very much interaction outside of this if they are in a childcare setting for 40 hours or more a week. And what impact is this going to have on children as they grow up in a world where they're not going to be empowered to be, to take action, to be valued and to be cherished by the people who actually live around them and just outside their front door? These children are probably not really getting to know their neighbours, and, they're going to feel disassociated from their communities as they age and turn into young people. And also there's a consideration to have that, well, adults further segregate children and adult spaces, and that cause a kind of a dissonance and an argument, like this clash of adults and children, and what impact that's going to have on everyone. So that's my rambling about safeguarding. So yes, safeguarding is super important, but yes, we also need to consider the impacts of this and how we're going to mitigate that. So we've just seen all of these barriers that I've talked about. So how are we going to make sure that, children are having access to safe adults that they can interact with from a range of genders, a range of cultures, a range of backgrounds, that they can speak to the post person, in the morning and give them a high five and things, because we're around, we're not leaving them on their own, and we're teaching children kind of what is acceptable interaction from someone you don't know really well, just to interactions that are not so safe. So for me, that's a real important thing to consider. We also need to think about the impact of the family on the children's access to communities. If parents are choosing communities for children, we need to consider things that might be limiting or impacting those opportunities. Families who are financially disadvantaged might not be able to access the same groups and classes where other families spend time. A parent might have a disability or a condition that affects how they access the community, and this was going to impact how the children are accessing communities around them. And there are so many more barriers about young children and community, and I think it's really important for us to recognise this. But all this being said, we childminders have a massive advantage over other settings, that we can go outside our front door every single day, and we can ensure that children have the opportunity to be seen and for them to access and see the world around them. We have the chance to bring communities back into children's lives in a safe and magnificent way, and this is a super pro for childminders, because us childminders are in such a good position to bring communities back to young children. I want us to think about how we can ensure that children get access to communities while they're with us, but also while we're keeping them safe. So step 1 is your setting, your community. You need to build those relationships with families. You need to engage with them. You need to have information available of services that you can signpost to. So if a family is struggling, that you have information right there to be able to send them to somewhere where they can get help, whether that's children's centres, job centres, any of these kinds of things, community groups, where parents can access food bank vouchers, anything like this. You need to know your morals, your vision, and your family feel. And even if you are a childminder that's on your own, no partner, no children of your own, you still need to know what your home feels like. You need to know what family feels like for you. and because this is going to impact how your setting feels. However, we also need to know safeguarding inside out. We need to know how to manage interactions both within our setting and out of our setting. And something that's really worth agreeing with parents is the information that you can share with people you meet about their child. For example, if you are someone who is likely to introduce the children by their name, oh, this is Ryan, and this is kind of, so any child's name here, and they're 3 years old, and this is baby Margaret, and she is 6 months old. You need to be able to say to parents that this is information you're going to share. And we also need to educate children before we go out there on what information is safe and not safe to share with people. So people knowing their name and their age, as their first name and their age, is not going to be a problem. But things like telling them where they live, that's going to be more of a problem. So we need to be teaching children, and that's part of safeguarding, as to how we keep ourselves safe. And we also need to know how we're going to advocate for children as you progress into the next step. So this is things that I have recently come across looking after a child with severe cognitive and physical disabilities. This is where people speak directly to the children and not just to you, and how you're going to manage those challenging situations. Or they might also talk to you, but they ask really outrageous things, and how you're going to advocate for that, and and the limits of things that you're going to be allowed to speak about with them, that you need to speak with the families about. So it might be that the families are comfortable with you talking about kind of any diagnosis or special needs, and so to kind of educate people, but some people might not be very happy with this. So this is something that you need to work on, and how how you see how you're going to deal with these situations, both in terms of kind of education, of community, of kind of being an advocate, but also confidentiality and safeguarding. It's a really big mix of things we have to think about. And I really do urge you to think about it before it happens, because when you're looking after a child, as I am, with quite significant developmental delays, and people, adults are asking you, oh, what's wrong with them, or when are they going to get better? And you need to be able to have answers to this that don't breach confidentiality or anything, make the child feel kind of in a negative way, but also be in a way that you can advocate, and you know how to stand up for them, and you say, well, there's they're not unwell, they're not going to get better because they're not unwell. There's nothing for them to get better from. So these are things that you should really think about in step 1 before you go out there, or even while you're going out there, you can still be developing these skills. Step 2 is getting outside of your setting. The EYFS states access to outdoors, and yes, if you have a garden, you can legally stay within the bounds of your setting all day, every day, and be providing all your legal requirements. However, I really, really, really implore and encourage you to go out of your front door. And at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you a list of ideas on how you can do this. And I think that us being outside is showing the world that children deserve to be active members of their community, and that they have a lot to bring to this world. They don't have to have the same skills. Just like adults don't need to have exactly the same skills as each other to be part of a community, children have different skills and different experiences that they bring. And actually, their kind of lack of experience can often provide really ingenious ways of doing things, because they have to problem solve and they see it from a completely different perspective, with no rules and no boundaries in place, because they don't have the rules in their head. So get out there, get talking to people, and I will share lots of ideas about that in a minute. Step 3 is engage with other childminders. Go to groups, share the podcast with other childminders, go on courses and conferences, get to know your childminding community, because it makes it such a less lonely place. We can share the highs and the lows of the job. We plan things together. You can let children, especially if they're childminders that you meet with regularly. You can let children build relationships with your childminder friends. And this is really helpful if you are unwell, and you can, tell a parent that you can send your child to this childminder who already knows your childminder for the day, and it helps a lot. And if you feel isolated, then please do go over to a previous episode, which was episode 1 on childminders feeling isolated, and that will have lots of ideas for support for you there. The amount of times I have turned up with my minded children, and they weren't expecting children at these events, but they are met with delight, I can't count. I always take with me a big bag of books, colouring, cars, any kind of smaller things that, if the event is not set up for children and I haven't had the chance to contact the organizer first, that will keep them kind of occupied, but also that they can interact with other people. So quite often cars are a good one, especially with kind of older people, because you can have the table and they can push the car across the table and then the person push it back to them. Again, building those relationships with people. So yes, that's always a good way. And our impact there is often seeing the next time that event is organised, they will then say that on the poster, children are welcome. So quite often it ends up being impactful, so that other children then start attending, because people in the community are seeing that children are welcome, so they're going to go and take their child there too. Another top tip is working with an institution. Now that sounds like a really big cold word, but it's not. An institution is basically like a place where people go to, like a school, a hospital, a children's centre, a care home, a day centre, a charity, or any other place that you can kind of connect with. These are organisations where people are. I currently work with a care farm, and they have been really, really great at working with me to build connections with their staff and their co-workers. The care farm supports adults with learning disabilities and physical disabilities, and it's been really great seeing the children build relationships with these adults who, quite frankly, behave quite differently to their expectations. On our last visit, they mentioned co-workers who they hadn't seen this time, and that shows that they're learning who is there within that community, and they're building relationships with them. So it's been a really great experience, and I'm really glad that I took that step to contact them and say, hey, could I just come along with my child-minded children and have some sessions? And they were like, yeah, that would be great. So you just try these things. A lot of people go to care homes. This is a really standard thing now, where you go to care homes for a singing session or play session, or just get in touch with these places, and more often than not, they're more than happy to have children come. You could inquire with some workplaces. Is there anywhere that will let children visit iconic parts of your community? Ideas being fire stations, place of worship, dentists, farms, shops, anything like that. And they can have a kind of behind the scenes exploration. I remember that Tesco used to do this thing called Farm to Fork, and it was mostly aimed at school children. But I contacted our local Tesco and said, oh, I can get a group of childminders together and we'd like to attend. And they have a younger kind of age group in what would kind of be appropriate and things. And we got to go and stand in the freezers and the fridges, the huge ones at the back. And oh gosh, it was chilly in there. But all of these kind of experiences, and linking with their local shops and the people that are in them. It's the people that are in them that are important. Like Tesco is this huge corporation that doesn't have really a big community feel, right? But if you see the same people every time, and the community champions and things like that in these bigger shops, then children are getting to kind of build it as a part of their local community. Get to know people when you're out and about on your daily routines, and you're probably going to see those people again and again and again. Post person, someone who walks their dog the same route as you walk every day, someone who is always in their garden pottering around. You could say hello. Work up the courage to ask their names and get the children involved in the conversation. So it's very common for adults that you meet to talk to you about the children. And so there is a skill in an adult asking you a question and then you getting the child to answer that question. And it's something that comes with a bit of practice. And you can also say things like, oh, I don't know, we should ask, child's name, and then look at them and see what happens. Try and get them interacting together, because we have this really separate thing with adults and children at the moment, probably because of the safeguarding thing, and people have kind of forgotten how to talk to children or don't feel it's appropriate and things, but we need to start building that back again, in my opinion. Attend local events and invite your child-minded families to come from time to time. So this one is more kind of what's in your free time, and I know your free time is so precious, but if you're going to something in your local area, like our area had like this little autumn show, like it had like a dog show attached to it, and you can say that you're going to go to that and would you like to come along. And kind of the longer you work in one area, you're going to be known as the childminder, and you can be the person that connects all those families together and to their wider community. Lots of people are really nervous of going to something new on their own. So if they know that you're going to be going to that event, they're more likely to go, feel safe, have a nice time. Their children are then going to have a nice time. And this could be anything from, yes, local dog show, local fetes, carnivals, cake sales, anything that kind of happens at a weekend. We quite often have kind of church bell ringing day type things. Anything that you feel like you're going to go along to and you don't mind kind of bumping into the children there. And some people quite often will hold events of their own like that for their childminding families. I remember doing one once in a local park where I was like, oh, it would be great if we could all meet at a local park, bring a picnic, and the children can all play together, and the family, the adults can all get to know each other. And because quite often, especially in childminding, we don't all have the same start time. So quite often the adults will meet other children of the setting, but they won't meet the parents because they don't start and finish at the same time. So that can be a really nice thing to do as well. And we can also get involved in community helping initiatives. So show your community that children are capable and have skills to offer. This could be fundraising, delivering food to a food collection point, like a food bank point, hold a cake sale of your own where they've kind of baked it or decorated things themselves and you're giving that money to charity. Go on litter picks with the community gardening, getting children involved in supporting the wildlife. I know there's quite a few childminders out there who are really good at this, and get them involved in campaigning if it's appropriate. So if the children are noticing that they're all the wildlife is starting to be missing from the pond, or there's loads of rubbish in the pond, get them involved in writing letters to MPs, get them involved in this kind of thing, because that will show them that they have a voice and they have an impact, and that as they grow up that they can impact their communities in a positive way and not just be seen as useless creatures as they get bigger, and that they're negative and that they have to fulfill that role, right? We want them to feel empowered, and we want the world to see that they have power and skills and voice. So that is a lot of different ways of getting children involved in communities, and I'm sure that many of you already participate in your communities, and I'd love to hear all about it because it's something I'm really passionate about. So please do go to the comments on social media, tag me in things that, tag Mind That Childminder in things that you're doing, because I really, really love it. And, ultimately that will give me more ideas as well. So the more ideas, the merrier. I am not in competition with you. You are going to be role modeling things that I really want to do. So let's get together on this and find out more ways to bring communities to children and knock down those barriers while also keeping them safe. We have talked so much today, and it's been a real thundering through all sorts of things, and so let's have a little bit of a roundup about what we've talked about. Community is important for everyone's mental health, yours, mine, other people out there, and the children and families. Self-esteem, well-being, and it really does include young children. We need to give children access to people and action in a tangible location, and this gives children a wealth I believe nothing else can provide. It brings joy to everyone too. So it's really important that we look after children safely, but we also give them opportunities to meet other people and experience the world. Being active in communities, in my opinion, means that children have more agency as they get older, and it reduces the distance between generations. It stops adults feeling like they can't talk to children. It stops people feel like children are not able to do things, that they're low skilled and that they're not very valuable in who they are right now. People generally just see children as the potential of being great adults, but actually they're really worthwhile and valuable right now, and we need to make sure that adults know that. And you can achieve this in all sorts of ways. There's no one way to bring community to your setting. Communities are something that you can't just plonk from one place to another and expect them to work. What works for me isn't going to work necessarily for you, because the people are different, the place is different, the opportunities available are different. So they are unique to the people and the places where you are, so you won't be able to do it wrong. You just need to do it safely and you'll be fine. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that you feel inspired to bring some community to the children that you care for and get them out there in the real world. This is something that Childminders can really, really deliver, and it's something so exceptionally different to what other settings can deliver. So I hope that you give it a go. Please do share ideas on the Mind That Childminders kind of social medias and things, because I'd really love to hear about what you do in your community and see if any ideas will work for mine. And take care, and I will see you again for the next episode. See you soon. Mind That Childminder. Find us on Facebook, X and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supportive piece.